How well do you truly know the people around you? We often fear the loud, the overt, the visibly toxic. But what if the real threat is more subtle? What if it's the friend who always seems so fragile, the partner who's overly agreeable, or the family member who wears the perfect smile? Carl Jung, one of the most influential minds in psychology, warned us that the most dangerous forces in our lives aren't born from malice, but from the unconscious. These forces don't announce themselves. They sneak into our relationships, disguised as normal behavior, draining us slowly until we begin to question our own reality. And the danger? Many of these people have no idea they're doing it. They aren't evil. They're unaware. And that makes them even more dangerous. Let's dive into the first 3 types of people Jung warned us about. Not to judge others, but to learn how to guard our own minds and recognize when we might be slipping into these patterns ourselves. 1. The unconscious manipulator. They never yell. They never demand. Instead, they wear the mask of fragility. Always misunderstood, always just a little hurt. But what they truly do is project their pain onto you without realizing it. Jung called projection one of the most dangerous functions of the psyche, where a person unconsciously attributes their own unresolved issues to someone else. If they feel abandoned, they accuse you of being distant. If they feel ashamed, they make you feel guilty for upsetting them. Their wounds become your burdens. And because it's all so subtle, you start questioning your tone, your words, even your character. You begin to lose the boundary between their emotions and your identity. Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The manipulator makes their emotional world your responsibility, and the more you try to help, the more tangled you become in their web. Empathy becomes a trap. The only way out is awareness, to realize that their wounds are being projected onto you, and you do not have to carry them. 2. The persona bearer. Some people don't manipulate through emotion, they do it through perfection. They are charming, composed, well-spoken. They're everything society admires. But underneath the polished exterior is a hollow center where authenticity once lived. Jung described the persona as the social mask we wear, the face we show the world. It's necessary, but when someone fully identifies with it, they lose touch with their true self. The persona bearer can't handle raw emotion. If you express vulnerability, they look uncomfortable. If you cry, they retreat. They live by a script, and when you step off it, they don't know what to do with you. Life with them feels like theater. You start censoring yourself, holding back truth to keep the performance going, and over time, you begin to wear your own mask just to feel accepted. But that's not connection. That's psychological suffocation. Jung taught that real growth, what he called individuation, means breaking free of the persona. But when someone refuses that journey, they can drag others into their sterile, scripted world where nothing real is allowed to grow. 3. The repressed shadow owner. These people seem saintly, calm, moral, always in control. But beneath the serenity is a storm of unacknowledged rage, envy, desire, and shame. This is the repressed shadow owner. Jung defined the shadow as everything we deny in ourselves. And when we repress it, it doesn't vanish. It waits. It returns through sarcasm, judgment, passive aggression, or sudden emotional explosions that feel completely out of proportion. These individuals often set impossibly high moral standards for others, while secretly battling their own demons. They may never raise their voice, but they make you feel small, guilty, or wrong for simply being human. Living with someone like this is like walking through a minefield. You never know what will set them off. And because they seem so composed, you assume their outbursts are your fault. You shrink. You apologize. You internalize their volatility. Jung warned, the stronger the persona, the darker the shadow. And unless the shadow is acknowledged, it will not only destroy the person who holds it, but everyone close to them. Some dangers don't scream or slam doors. They quote morality. They smile while they correct you. And yet, something inside you begins to shrink. Carl Jung understood a troubling truth. Not all psychological threats look like violence. Some come dressed in principles. Some are delivered with politeness. And in this part, we'll look at 3 more psychological types Jung warned us about. They don't always intend harm, but their lack of self-awareness can cause the deepest damage. Let's begin. 4. The moral controller. They speak with conviction. They care about right and wrong deeply. But what if their concern isn't rooted in wisdom, but in fear? The moral controller uses ethics as a shield. Every conversation becomes a lesson. Every disagreement feels like a courtroom. At first, their sense of responsibility can seem admirable, but soon you realize that their rules are more about control than compassion. Carl Jung noted that extreme morality often hides an unconscious shadow. These individuals deny their darker impulses, anger, jealousy, sexuality, and instead project them onto others. They label other people as toxic, dangerous, or sinful, while ignoring the same qualities in themselves. Their praise is conditional. Their affection is based on compliance. And slowly, you learn to edit yourself. You suppress your instincts, your playfulness, even your truth, just to stay good in their eyes. But it's a trap, because their standards are not about truth, they are about power. The more you follow their rules, the more invisible you become. Jung believed that real individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires breaking free from imposed ideals. Until then, you live not as yourself, but as someone else's version of virtue. 5. The complexed individual. Imagine being with someone who is warm one moment, cold the next. One day they love you, the next day they withdraw or explode, and you have no idea why. This is the complexed individual. Jung described complexes as emotional fragments buried in the unconscious. They are unresolved wounds that hijack the present, making the person react not to you, but to their past. You might say something small, "You forgot to call me," and suddenly they become defensive, furious, or shut down completely. But their reaction isn't really about that sentence. It's about an old scar being reopened. Maybe a parent who abandoned them, a betrayal long ago, a wound that never healed. You try to understand, you walk on eggshells, you rationalize their outbursts because you remember their loving moments. But over time, their internal chaos becomes your emotional instability. And here's the truth. They don't mean to hurt you, but until they face their own wounds, they will keep bleeding into the people closest to them. Jung warned that the unconscious will act whether we acknowledge it or not. If they don't do their inner work, no amount of empathy on your part can save them. 6. The psychic vampire. This one doesn't insult you. They don't explode or moralize. They just drain you. Psychic vampires are the ones who always need something, your time, your energy, your attention. They seem vulnerable at first. Maybe they're going through a hard time. Maybe they open up about their wounds, their loneliness, their fears. You listen, you comfort, you help. And then without realizing it, your life starts revolving around them. Your problems take a back seat. Your boundaries begin to erode. You feel guilty for needing space. You feel selfish for saying no. You feel like you owe them your energy because they seem so helpless. But that helplessness is deceptive. Jung saw this dynamic as a failure to individuate, a refusal to carry one's own emotional weight. These people unconsciously attach themselves to others, demanding energy but offering no growth in return. They don't want to evolve. They want to be rescued again and again and again. And if you let them, they'll keep taking until you forget where you end and they begin. Jung believed that wholeness starts with separation. You cannot save someone who refuses to become whole. And you are not selfish for choosing yourself. We've spent the first 2 parts examining 6 dangerous psychological patterns in others. But now comes the hardest part. What if you've seen pieces of yourself in those very people? Carl Jung warned us, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. This is not a gentle insight, it's a psychological earthquake. Because the moment you realize the enemy isn't just out there, your real journey begins. The unconscious manipulator. Maybe you've done it too. Maybe you've guilt-tripped someone without meaning to. Maybe your pain leaked out and became blame. The bearer of the persona. Have you ever worn a smile while falling apart inside? Have you ever silenced your truth just to keep the peace? The repressed shadow? Have you ever judged someone harshly, not because they were wrong, but because they represented something you couldn't accept in yourself? It's not about shame. It's about integration. Jung believed that the path to psychological freedom begins with owning our shadow, not burying it. Because what we refuse to see in ourselves doesn't vanish. It acts. It sabotages. It chooses for us. When we say, I'm nothing like them, we separate. When we say, I could be them, we awaken. This is the paradox of growth. The more we face our own darkness, the less harm we do to others. Because projection ends the moment awareness begins. Take the moral controller. Maybe you've stood on your own pedestal silently or loudly, condemning others to avoid facing your contradictions. We all do it. The moment you see it, the spell breaks. You stop judging, you start understanding, or the complexed individual. Have you ever snapped at someone for no reason? Have you punished your partner for a wound they didn't cause? That wasn't you. It was a younger version of you, still crying for help, still asking to be heard. And the psychic vampire? Hard truth. Have you ever leaned on someone so much that their energy became your oxygen? Not out of malice, but out of fear. Jung would say, you weren't bad, you were unconscious. And that's the root of all human harm, lack of awareness. But here's where the shift begins. You don't need to hate your shadow. You don't need to exile the wounded parts of you. You need to invite them to the table. You need to speak to them, to listen, to understand. Because once you understand why your shadow behaves the way it does, why it manipulates, judges, withdraws, clings, you no longer fear it. You integrate it. And what was once a source of destruction becomes your greatest source of power. In Jungian psychology, this process is called individuation, not becoming perfect, not becoming good, but becoming whole. It's when the outer mask cracks and the real self, raw, wounded, wise, steps forward. This is when your relationships change. You no longer demand others to validate you because you've met the part of yourself that needed validation, and you chose to hold it instead of projecting it. You no longer fall for the same manipulators because you've reclaimed the part of you that used to resonate with them. You no longer feel threatened by others' strength because you've learned to access your own. And most of all, you become less reactive, less defensive, less entangled in emotional drama. Not because you're numb, but because you've begun to see clearly. Jung wrote, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That's the real message here. That everything you once blamed on fate, your heartbreaks, your toxic friendships, your recurring pain, wasn't fate at all. It was a pattern you inherited, a pattern you repeated, a pattern you now have the power to end. This is the turning point. You stop asking, why are people like this? And start asking, why do I keep finding them? You stop saying, I always get hurt, and start exploring, what part of me is still bleeding? You stop pointing fingers, and you start doing the work. It's not easy. It requires brutal honesty, courage, stillness, and often grief. Because you will mourn the version of yourself that allowed others to take advantage, the one who didn't know better, the one who kept trying to be liked instead of being whole. But in that grief, something new is born. Clarity, power, wholeness. And that's what Jung meant by transformation, not spiritual bypassing, not love and light denial, but facing the darkness within until it has no more power to harm you or anyone else. This isn't the end of the journey. It's the middle. The messy, necessary middle where your identity dissolves and your true self begins to emerge. So let me ask you, have you seen your own shadow in this video? Have you felt a flicker of discomfort? Good. That means the work has already begun. So now you've seen the patterns, not just in others, but in yourself. You've recognized the manipulator, the persona bearer, the repressed shadow, the moral controller, the complex individual, and the psychic vampire, not only as people who may surround you, but as fragments of your own psyche. And that awareness alone has already begun to dissolve their power. But awareness without action is not transformation. Carl Jung didn't just call for recognition, he called for integration. True psychological freedom, he said, does not come from banishing the darkness, but from learning to live with it without being ruled by it. So, how do you do that? First, boundaries. Not walls of anger, but lines of clarity. If you've lived in emotional enmeshment, this will feel like betrayal, but it's not. It's the first step toward reclaiming your inner territory. Boundaries say, this is where I end and you begin. Without them, your soul remains porous, inviting projection, guilt, and confusion. With them, you become whole. Second, radical self-honesty, not the polished version of introspection, the real kind, the one that asks, where do I manipulate? Where do I perform? Who am I when no one is watching? This isn't about self-blame, it's about self-ownership. Jung once said, we meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life. Every person who triggers you is a mirror. Every relationship that drains you is a lesson. And every time you break a pattern, you not only change your life, you change your lineage. Third, emotional individuation. Many people grow physically, intellectually, even spiritually, but remain emotionally fused to their past. They carry wounds from their childhood, project them onto partners, expect others to rescue or punish or complete them. This is the trap Jung warned us about, letting our unconscious run the show while we call it love, friendship, or destiny. True individuation is when you stop needing others to carry your pain and start healing it yourself. When you stop demanding the world to change and start meeting your inner world with presence, compassion, and truth. It doesn't mean you isolate. It means you relate differently. You no longer choose people who feed your wounds. You choose those who respect your wholeness. You stop clinging to those who make you feel needed and start walking with those who remind you of your power. Fourth, awakening from projection. Projection is how the unconscious avoids responsibility. It paints the canvas of the world with our own disowned emotions, desires, fears. The angry boss becomes your critical parent. The controlling partner becomes your lost self. The aloof friend becomes your inner abandonment. But once you see the paintbrush in your own hand, you can begin to choose different colors. You can respond instead of react. You can pause, reflect, reclaim. Because here's the truth Jung would want you to hear. You are not the role you've played, not the pattern you've repeated, not the pain you've inherited. You are the one who can see, and that makes you the one who can choose. It takes time. It takes silence. It takes facing emotions you've buried for years. Rage that was never allowed, grief that was never honored, longing that was masked with pride. But every tear you finally let fall, every truth you finally admit, it's a door. And on the other side is freedom. Psychological maturity is not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming honest. It's about noticing when your inner child is driving and gently placing them in the back seat. Not exiling them, not silencing them, but no longer letting them steer. It's about allowing others to be responsible for their emotions, about walking away from dynamics that only make sense to your trauma, about saying, no, not this time, and meaning it. And it's about embracing the unknown. Because once you stop living on autopilot, once you stop being pulled by your unconscious, you step into something rare and beautiful, presence, where your choices are conscious, where your love is free, where your inner world no longer mirrors chaos but peace. Jung said, your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. You've done the dreaming. You've lived in roles, personas, reactions. Now, wake up. Not to the world's version of success. Not to someone else's checklist of who you should be, but to the authentic you. The one who has always been there, waiting. This is your sovereignty. Not something given to you, but something reclaimed. So the next time you encounter manipulation or cold perfection or moral judgment, pause and ask yourself, is this about them or is this a mirror? And if it's a mirror, what am I finally ready to see? Because that's the work. That's the liberation, and you, brother, are ready.